Dawn breaks over a French hedgerow, June 1944. A Sherman tank sits motionless, smoke curling from its turret ring. The crew bailed out hours ago when an 88mm shell tore through the sponson and ignited ammo. German forward observers mark it as a kill in their log. 2 days later, that same hull number rolls back into formation. Turret welded, track replaced, engine purring. The crew inside is different, but the tank is alive again. This wasn't luck. It was a system the Wehrmacht never understood until it was too late. German doctrine said destroyed tanks stayed destroyed. When a panzer took a disabling hit, recovery crews waited for nightfall, then dragged the wreck miles back to a railhead workshop. Engine swaps, turret repairs, and hull patching required weeks. If the front moved, the tank was abandoned. This made sense when battles were fluid and tank factories were in the Reich, but for the Americans landing at Normandy, every Sherman mattered. Replacement hulls sat weeks away across the Atlantic. The solution wasn't more to tanks, it was resurrection. Enter the M32 tank recovery vehicle. Built on a Sherman chassis, it carried a 30-ton capacity winch, an 18-foot hydraulic boom, and a full welding kit. The turret was replaced with a fixed superstructure housing an 81mm mortar for smoke, and an armored cab for the crew. It weighed 30 tons, could keep pace with a tank column, and most importantly, it could work under fire. By the end of the war, over 1,100 M32s were built. Each one was a rolling repair depot. The recovery cycle had 3 phases. First came retrieval. When a Sherman was knocked out, the company executive officer radioed for an M32 within minutes. The recovery vehicle moved up, sometimes under artillery fire, hooked the disabled tank with its winch, and dragged it back to the battalion aid station, usually a field less than a mile behind the front. If the tank was immobilized by track damage but the engine still ran, crews could swap a track block in under 2 hours using pre-positioned spare links. If it needed towing, the M32 could haul it at 8 miles per hour. Speed mattered. Every hour a tank sat in no man's land was an hour the enemy could shell it into scrap. Phase 2 was triage. At the company level, mechanics assessed what could be fixed on site versus what needed battalion-level heavy repair. Track and suspension damage, fixed in hours. Road wheels could be swapped without lifting the hull using jacks built into the M32's toolkit. Thrown tracks were retensioned with hand cranks. Engine troubles that didn't require a full pull, clogged fuel lines, ignition issues, radiator leaks, were handled by teams who knew every bolt on a Ford GAA engine. If the damage was limited to running gear and the turret still traversed, the tank could return to combat the same day. But when the damage was catastrophic, engine fires, turret ring fractures, hull penetrations, the tank went to phase 3, the battalion maintenance company. This is where the real miracle happened. These units operated 15 to 20 miles behind the front, in barns, fields, or improvised depots. They had overhead cranes built from salvaged bridge girders, portable forges, arc welders running off generator trucks, and stockpiles of spare parts cannibalized from write-offs. A typical maintenance battalion could handle a dozen simultaneous heavy repairs. Engine pulls were the most common job. The Ford GAA V8 in most Shermans weighed 1,200 pounds. Using the M32's boom and block and tackle, a trained crew could yank it out in 90 minutes, drop in a replacement from the spares pool, reconnect fuel and cooling lines, and button it up in under 12 hours. Turrets were another specialty. If the turret ring was damaged but the turret itself was intact, welders cut the damaged section out, grafted in a salvaged ring segment, and re-welded the seam. The turret was lifted with the boom, lowered back on, and tested for traverse. Total time, 18 hours. Hull penetrations required plate patches. Welders cut a steel plate to size, beveled the edges, and welded it over the hole from both sides. If the penetration compromised structural integrity, internal bracing was added. The work wasn't pretty, but it held. Tanks that took 3 or 4 hits during the war often had patchwork hulls that looked like quilts. The crews didn't care. As long as it drove and shot, it was good enough. One detail the history books often skip: interior cleanup. When a Sherman was penetrated and the crew bailed, the inside was a nightmare. Blood, fire residue, shell fragments, and sometimes worse. Recovery crews hosed out the fighting compartment through the bottom escape hatch, scrubbed the floors, repainted over scorch marks, and swapped out seat cushions. Then, they sent it back. Crews from knocked-out tanks often found themselves assigned to a new Sherman that still smelled like solvent and paint. Some soldiers were hit twice in different tanks during the same battle. The emotional toll was brutal. but the logistical efficiency was undeniable. The 3rd Armored Division's maintenance battalion became legendary for this. During the Normandy breakout, they installed over 100 hedgerow cutter modifications in a single week using steel salvage from German beach obstacles. These modifications, nicknamed Rhino Tusks, turned standard Shermans into hedge-busting machines. Each installation required cutting, welding, and reinforcing the lower glasses. The battalion's motto summed up their mindset: we do the difficult immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. The speed of this system had a strategic effect. German intelligence officers consistently undercounted Allied tank strength because they assumed knocked-out tanks stayed knocked out. A Sherman marked as destroyed on Monday would reappear in reconnaissance reports by Wednesday, leading to confusion and inflated estimates of American production capacity. In reality, the Allies weren't building more tanks, they were just fixing them faster than the Germans believed possible. Numbers tell the story. During the 11 months from D-Day to VE Day, American armored divisions in Europe lost thousands of Shermans to enemy action, but only a fraction were total write-offs. Roughly 60% of disabled tanks were returned to service within 48 hours. Another 20% were repaired within a week. The remaining 20% were either catastrophic losses or became parts donors. This meant that at any given moment, a tank battalion might have 60 tanks on the roster, but only 40 in the field, because the other 20 were cycling through the repair pipeline. The M32 itself became a target. German crews learned to recognize the boxy silhouette and the boom. Knocking out a recovery vehicle delayed American repairs and left disabled Shermans stranded, but the M32 was armored like a tank, and its crews were just as aggressive. Some recovery operations happened under direct fire, with the M32 using its own 81mm mortar to lay smoke while winching a tank free. There are accounts of M32s taking hits, limping back to their own repair depot, and being fixed within hours so they could return to pulling out more tanks. By the end of the war, this system was so refined that maintenance battalions could set up a full depot in under 6 hours, operate for weeks, then pack up and leapfrog forward as the front advanced. They carried everything they needed on trucks, cranes, welders, parts bins, toolkits, even spare armor plate. The entire apparatus was mobile, modular, and relentless. The Germans never replicated it. Their recovery vehicles were converted tank chassis with winches, but they lacked the armor, mobility, and integrated logistics of the M32. More importantly, they lacked the spare parts pipeline. American industry shipped parts pallets directly to forward depots using the Red Ball Express and other trucking routes. German parts had to be requisitioned through a centralized system that often took weeks. By 1944, Wehrmacht tank battalions were cannibalizing their own vehicles just to keep a handful operational. So when you see footage of Sherman tanks rolling through French villages, remember this: some of those tanks had already died once. They'd been hit, burned, dragged out of a ditch, and pieced back together by men with wrenches and welding torches. The miracle wasn't that Shermans kept fighting, it's that they kept coming back. 48 hours from wreck to war, that was the edge Germany never saw coming.